Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. Tonight, the sharp mind of Nero Wolfe faces a puzzle in the wrong hat at the funeral. In a chapel heavy with silence, one hat sits where it shouldn't, a quiet signal that mourning and murder have crossed paths. What secret was carried into the service, and who intended it to stay hidden? Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share below. If you crave mysteries woven with cunning and crime, subscribe and stay close. The next case is always near. Now pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. It was the kind of gray New York afternoon that makes a man feel like skipping the sidewalk and heading straight for a bourbon, especially if that man happens to be employed by a genius whose idea of movement involves getting up to shoo a cat, and even that only under duress. I'd just come back from a highly uninspired stroll to the corner deli. No stakeouts, no tails, no trouble. When the bell rang. Ordinarily, I don't mind answering the door, since the clientele that manages to get past our ironclad phone defenses are usually either rich, desperate, or at least entertaining. This one, though, didn't look like she had a joke to spare. She stepped into the vestibule like someone entering a church after committing a sin. Early 40s, neatly gloved, grieving in cashmere, and on her head a brown fedora that looked like it belonged at a track meet, not a funeral. I clocked it immediately, and so would Wolfe, which meant things were about to get interesting. "Miss Estelle Vogelman to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. Voice cool, like a school teacher who didn't expect you to pass. She handed over a card with just her name embossed in black. No address, no phone, no frills. "He's indisposed," I said, which is always true. "But I'll check to see if he's disposed to becoming undisposed." I left her in the front room and made my way to the office. Wolfe was in his chair, lips barely moving, fingers poised together like he was praying for me to turn around and leave, which meant he'd heard the doorbell, knew a female voice had arrived, and was already trying to calculate the odds of escape. "She's got money," I said, "or at least grief and decent tailoring. Name's Estelle Vogelman. Wears grief better than hats." Wolfe grunted. "She wore a brown fedora to a funeral." "Bingo." "How'd you guess?" "Archie, no woman enters this house with that perfume unless she's coming from somewhere solemn, and no solemnity would condone such a hat unless it were significant." That's Wolfe. 2 sentences in and already 2 moves ahead. "Shall I show her in?" He sighed like a man agreeing to host termites. "Yes, but only until 3:20. I've a session with the orchids at 4. I brought her into the office and gestured toward the red chair, the one that looks comfortable but subtly isn't. Wolfe inclined his head 1/16 of an inch, which in his dialect means start talking. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I was told you don't take cases lightly." "That's true," Wolfe replied, "though I take some lightly, some heavily, and some not at all." "Yours?" She blinked. "I think someone used a funeral to send a message." "A threat? Whose funeral?" Wolfe asked. "My uncle's. Herbert Carraway. He passed last week. Cardiac arrest, they say. But he was in fine health. And the message," Wolfe prompted, steepling his fingers. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small white envelope. This was in the lining of his casket. It wasn't there before the viewing. It was sealed with red wax, and inside was a single object. She handed it to Wolfe. He didn't touch it. He let me take it, which I did, holding it by the edges like a museum curator. Inside the envelope was a black chess bishop. Wooden, polished, too finely carved to be from a toy set. "Cute," I said. "Someone's got a flair for funerary symbolism." Wolfe's lips compressed. "And why come to me, Miss Vogelman? Surely the police have been informed." "No," she said, firm and fast. "My uncle was wealthy and private. If someone is threatening our family, our estate, I want discretion." "You are discreet." "Miss Vogelman," Wolfe said slowly, "I am sedentary, gluttonous, irritable, and beholden to a code that forbids stupidity. But yes, I am discreet. I saw the flicker of something across her eyes. Apprehension, relief, maybe both. She took a breath. I don't know what it means. But when I asked the funeral director if anyone had tampered with the casket, he said no. Yet that envelope wasn't there at the church. It was at the cemetery. So someone slipped it in between locations, I said. They gate-crashed a body to deliver a bishop. Nice Wolfe made a sound, almost a murmur. Why a bishop? That's what I hoped you'd tell me, she said. Wolfe closed his eyes. That meant his mind had opened. Miss Vogelman continued. And one more thing. At the funeral, there was a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, grey suit, watching from a distance. I asked around, and no one else knew him either. But he wore a hat, brown felt, wide brim, wrong for the season. I glanced at Wolfe. He didn't open his eyes. I'll need names, he said, of all who attended. And I'll need to speak with your family attorney. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you, take notes, and apply whatever charms are required to extract the truth from reluctant lips. I blinked. That meant we had a case. Estelle Vogelman stood. You'll take it then. Wolfe opened one eye, just a fraction. I already have. She left, and Wolfe let out a long exhale as though the universe had temporarily righted itself. She's not telling us everything, I said. No, Wolfe agreed. But neither are they. They who? The ones who left the bishop. Or wore the wrong hat. Wolfe didn't say much after Miss Vogelman left, which in Wolfe's terms is like a barn burning in silence. I could see the gears turning beneath the mountainous forehead, even as he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling like he was contemplating the structure of the cosmos or a particularly stubborn soufflé recipe. I let the silence breathe for a bit before I broke it with the usual amount of tact. So, boss, we're taking on funeral chess pieces now. His lips twitched, which was as close as Wolfe ever got to admitting he enjoyed something. This is not about a chess piece, Archie. It's about punctuation. Yes, the wrong hat at the funeral was a comma placed where a period should be. Now, I've learned not to chase metaphors with Wolfe. He throws them like darts, deadly and never in need of applause. Instead, I got moving. By 4 o'clock, I had Estelle Vogelman's list of funeral attendees, 18 names if you didn't count the dearly departed, and an appointment with her late uncle's attorney, one Daniel Kemp, who operated out of a brown brick office suite on 62nd. I took a cab uptown, not because I'm lazy, but because Wolfe would consider it uncivilized for his assistant to arrive windblown and sweating in front of legal counsel. We're classy like that. Kemp was an odd duck, tall and dry as a gavel, with hair like straw and the personality of someone who spoke to ledgers more than people. When I told him Wolfe was taking the matter seriously, he frowned like I'd used the wrong fork. I don't know why Miss Vogelman contacted you, he said, motioning toward a leather chair that squeaked when I sat. There's been no indication of foul play. Herbert's death was natural. Peaceful. You saw the body? I was at the viewing, yes, along with half the board of his trust and 3 of his favorite poker friends. Why? Because somebody left a souvenir in the casket. A black bishop. Heard of that trick before? His mouth flattened into a line so thin you could thread it through a keyhole. No, that sounds like melodrama. Maybe. Or maybe it's a message. Something your late client had coming to him. Kemp waved a hand like he was dismissing a fly. If someone had a grievance, they could have come forward in life. Carraway was no saint, but he didn't make enemies. That you know of, I said. Let's talk about his estate. He blinked slowly. His will was executed 5 days before his death. I drew it up myself. The majority of his estate was placed in trust, with Estelle as the sole living heir and trustee. Anyone contesting that? No, he had no children, no surviving siblings, and no ex-wives worth mentioning, and he was generous in life. Quiet, but generous. That quiet generosity ever reach a man in a brown felt hat? Kemp looked puzzled. I'm sorry. Estelle says a man no one recognized was watching the funeral. Gray suit, brown hat. Wrong for the season. He paused. No, not that I recall. But I wasn't exactly studying the crowd. I didn't expect him to be. He was the kind of guy who probably remembered the exact font used in the probate forms, but couldn't describe a face if it bit him on the ankle. Still, something about his deliberate calm struck me as just a bit too managed. After I left, I rang Saul Panzer. If Wolfe was going to stay planted in his throne of deduction, we'd need our ace in the field. Saul's better at blending into shadows than a guilty conscience, and I figured a quiet shadow at the cemetery might know something. Saul, I said, once I had him on the line. You ever tail a guy in a graveyard? You offering a job or a hobby? Job. Gray suit, brown hat. Seen at the Caraway funeral. If you can find out who he is and why he was watching without a mourner's badge, Wolfe might just write you a sonnet. Consider it done, Saul said, and that was that. Back at the brownstone, Fritz had lamb chops going, and Wolfe was pretending not to smell them. I briefed him on Kemp's guarded answers and Estelle's solid inheritance. Wolfe, naturally, had his attention fixed on a book I'd never seen before, one of those little hardcovers with frayed pages and a foreign title. What's the book? I asked. 17th century Jesuit ciphers, he murmured. Helpful. Planning to speak in code to Estelle? No, I'm planning to interpret one that meant he'd seen something I hadn't, which wasn't exactly news, but it did mean we weren't just playing a hunch anymore. Wolfe tapped the envelope with the bishop still inside it. The seal was red wax. Impressed with what? I thought back. Didn't look like any family crest. Just a circle, almost like a ring, Wolfe finished. A seal ring. But not heraldic. Stylized, possibly institutional. He leaned back, satisfied, and closed the cipher book. Archie, you will see Miss Vogelman tomorrow. Ask her if her uncle ever funded or was affiliated with any fraternal orders, chess clubs, or Masonic organizations. Anything that might use black bishops and ritual symbols. Sounds like a cult. It may be, Wolfe said, but it is more likely a society. And if someone disrupted a funeral to deliver a message, it suggests they're observing old codes for new reasons. You think someone's taking revenge over a chess game? No. I think someone's drawing battle lines using a bishop. I didn't say it, but I was starting to wonder what kind of game Wolfe was playing too. The man could peel an onion with a question, and it felt like he'd just nicked the first layer. Also, Wolfe added, you will ask Miss Vogelman what hats her uncle owned. All of them, I blinked. You think the hat was his? I think the hat is a breadcrumb, he said. Someone wants to be followed. And just like that, the game had changed. We weren't hunting ghosts. We were answering a summons. This chapter has ended. It was just after 10 the next morning when I rang Estelle Vogelman's building buzzer. She lived in a 6-story limestone just off Park, with a lobby that smelled like old roses and elevator music that tried to sound like Vivaldi. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept much, which, to be fair, was a compliment under the circumstances. The brown fedora was gone, replaced by a deep blue headband and a cashmere wrap that probably cost more than my suits combined. I wasn't sure you'd follow up so soon, she said, stepping back to let me in. You left a bishop in a box and a man with a hat problem at a funeral, I said. You made an impression. Her apartment was neat, minimalist, and not trying too hard. Monochrome art, no photographs. Either she wasn't sentimental or she'd had reasons not to be. I sat in a pale leather armchair while she perched across from me, knees crossed, hands folded like she was preparing for a deposition. I'll keep it simple, I said. Wolfe has questions. So do I. Let's start with the obvious. Did your uncle belong to any organizations? Organizations? Fraternal, Ritual, ceremonial, or otherwise secret society flavored. Chess clubs with crests, masons with strange handshakes, you name it. She looked surprised. Genuinely, I thought. No, not that I know of. Uncle Herbert wasn't the club type. He played poker every other Tuesday with a group of friends, but that was about it. And bridge at the club on Thursdays. Any of those friends ever wear signet rings? I wouldn't know. That one landed like a dart in a soft apple. She hadn't expected that angle. Would you mind giving me their names? The poker group? She hesitated, then rose and walked to a small desk in the corner. From a drawer, she pulled a narrow notepad and wrote out 4 names. Her handwriting was as crisp as her wardrobe. Have you contacted the police yet? I asked. No. Because? She folded her arms. Because they'd laugh at me. A chess piece in a casket? A man in a hat? They'd write it off as nerves. You haven't, which is why I came to you. And you're absolutely certain that the bishop wasn't placed there by the funeral home? They swore it wasn't. The coffin was sealed and transported directly from the chapel to the cemetery. There was no opportunity. There's always opportunity, I said. You just have to know what door it wears. She looked tired. More than tired. Defensive, like she'd been keeping something under wraps and it was starting to itch. I let the silence stretch, hoping it would crack something. When you mentioned the hat, I said casually, you said it didn't belong. Not just in terms of style, like you recognized it. She blinked, then looked down. My uncle had a hat like that, years ago. He didn't wear it often. I almost forgot about it until I saw that man still have it. No, it disappeared after my aunt died. She used to complain about it constantly, describe it. She did. Wide-brimmed, brown felt, ribbon band, slightly bowed in the crown, just enough detail to match what we'd heard. I need to know if your uncle had enemies, I said. Not public ones, private ones. Quiet grudges. Anyone he fought with, cut off, sued, cheated, dismissed, or ignored. He would turn into a slow boil. She considered. There was someone. A man named Loren Grieve. He and Uncle Herbert had a falling out. Years ago. Something to do with a real estate deal gone wrong. Grieve used to be at the poker games, but he stopped coming around. Why? I don't know. One week he just stopped being invited. That wasn't nothing. I added Grieve to the list and tucked it into my pocket. And the hats, I said. What other hats did your uncle own? She smiled faintly. That's an odd question. Odd hats make odd cases. Humor me, she thought for a moment. 2 fedoras, one black, one gray, a trilby, and that brown one. He had them all on a stand in his wardrobe, but the brown one vanished after Aunt Myra's death. I assumed she threw it away. Your uncle never mentioned it. No, I stood. Thank you, Miss Vogelman. One more thing. What did your uncle do before he retired? He was in international freight. Shipping and customs. Mostly logistics and insurance claims. Now that was a wrinkle. A man in international shipping with contacts and quiet enemies, and a sudden bishop dropped in his casket. Maybe this wasn't about symbolism at all. Maybe it was about repayment. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't bother pretending to be surprised when I walked in with answers. He was already at his desk, the chess bishop now resting on a folded cloth like a relic. She confirms the hat existed, I said. Described it in detail. Her uncle had it years ago. It vanished after his wife died. Wolfe grunted. So it was his. The man at the funeral wore it deliberately, not as a disguise, but as a reference homage or threat. Both, he said. The bishop represents subversion, controlled motion. If this were a warning, it was elegantly framed. And the poker group? I handed him the list. 4 names. One stands out. Loren Grieve. Former friend turned excommunicado. Something about a business deal gone bad. Panzer will find him, Wolfe said. He's already begun. In the meantime, You will visit the funeral director. Ask if anyone besides the staff handled the coffin in transit. If the bishop appeared between the chapel and the burial site, then the leak lies there. And the ring. Wolfe opened a drawer and pulled out a small magnifying lens. The wax seal shows trace impressions, almost circular. Faint beveling. I believe it is a signet. Not ornamental. Society, then. Yes, possibly old, possibly forgotten. I moved to the window and watched the traffic crawl along 9th Avenue. We had a bishop in a casket, a man in a borrowed hat, and a funeral-turned-stage play. Somewhere in the space between ritual and revenge, someone had cracked open the past and left a piece behind. You think this is about inheritance? I asked. No, Wolfe said. I think it's about exclusion. Someone was removed, silenced, and now they want their seat back at the table. He said it with certainty, and I felt it settle in the room like a gustless storm. Wolfe didn't speak much after I gave him the full rundown. Estelle's memory of the brown hat, the poker group, and the disappearing bishop. He just stared at the black figurine like it might hop off the desk and start confessing. When he gets quiet like that, it usually means he's threading invisible wires between things no one else has noticed yet. I've seen him put a man in jail on the strength of a misplaced comma, so I don't ask for blueprints. I wait for instructions, and instructions came swiftly enough. You'll see Mr. Jelinek at the funeral home, Wolfe said, eyes still on the bishop. Be direct, but subtle. A contradiction in your nature, I know. Determine who had access to the coffin during transport, names, times. And if anyone left the room, that was Wolfe's version of a cheerleading speech. I made it to Jelinek and Sons just before lunch. The place looked like it had been imported from a Transylvanian mountaintop and bleached to remove the superstition. The director himself, Vernon Jelinek, was tall, serious, and had the kind of voice that sounded like he rehearsed in mausoleums. His handshake was firm, funereal, and thoroughly uninterested in small talk. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I understand you're working on behalf of Miss Vogelman. I was surprised to hear from her again. I assumed all was in order, mostly, I said, except for a rogue chess piece showing up in Mr. Carraway's casket, which, I'm told, is not part of your deluxe burial package. He blinked. A chess piece. Black bishop, in an envelope. Red wax seal, Jelinek frowned, clearly disturbed, not just professionally, but personally. There was no such item when the casket was sealed at the chapel. I supervised it myself. It was closed at precisely 10:05 a.m. The hearse departed by 10:15. The graveside service was at 11. Any stops? No. Direct transport. The driver was Marvin Dukas, been with us for 9 years. Highly trustworthy. I'd still like to speak with him. I'll call him in. 10 minutes later, Dukas appeared, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He looked like a guy who could drive a casket through a hurricane without flinching, and had probably done so. I took him aside and kept it informal. Marvin, did anyone approach the vehicle between the chapel and the cemetery? Anyone stop you, redirect you, distract you? He shook his head. No, sir. Took Madison down to 23rd. Cut across. Parked at the west gate. Stayed with the car the whole time. Why? Ever seen this before? I showed him a picture of the envelope and the bishop that I'd snapped in Wolfe's office. His brow furrowed. Nope, but that's weird. Who would do something like that? Good question. One more. Anyone else ever help you prep the vehicle before you left? No, I loaded the casket myself, locked it, signed the manifest. Manifest. Yeah. Chapel signs off, I sign off. It goes with the casket. Proof of chain, that was something Wolfe hadn't mentioned, but I had a feeling he'd known it existed. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the highlights. He listened without blinking, his eyes half-lidded like he was napping through a sonata. The manifest, he said. Did you acquire it? No, but I know where it is. Get it. That was all. Get it. It took me less than an hour to persuade Jelinek to release a photocopy of the manifest. It showed the usual driver, time and contents, but in the bottom left corner, someone had initialed the release. Not Jelinek. Not Doukas. "Who's HT?" I asked. Jelinek looked at the sheet like it had betrayed him. "Harlan Teggart. He's not supposed to sign off alone. He's an assistant embalmer. Young. New, where is he?" "Day off. But I can get you his address." Of course, he could. An hour later, I was standing in front of a brownstone in Queens that had definitely seen better decades. Teggart opened the door, wearing a shirt that hadn't been pressed since Roosevelt was president, and blinked at me like I'd woken him from a 1,000-year nap. "Harlan?" I asked. "Yeah." "Archie Goodwin. I'm with Nero Wolfe." That name usually gets one of three reactions: admiration, fear, or the sudden urge to lawyer up. Teggart gave me the second. "I didn't do anything," he said. I smiled. "I didn't say you did. I just want to know why your initials are on the Caraway manifest." "I was just helping." Vernon was in the other room. Doukas was late. I signed it to keep things moving. "That's all. See anything unusual?" He hesitated. There was a guy. Briefcase. Said he was from the family's estate lawyer. Needed to place something with the deceased. Said it was personal. "Did you get a name?" "No, but he showed me a card. Daniel Kemp. Lawyer." That set a bell off so loud I nearly thanked him with a tip. "You let him in?" For like a minute. He placed something in the casket, said it was private and he had clearance. "Did you verify it with Kemp?" "No. Should I have? I left him sweating and caught a cab back. Wolfe was waiting." "He used Kemp's name," I said. "Got access to the casket." "Left the Bishop never verified. Kemp will deny it," Wolfe said. "And we'll believe him?" "Yes, because if it were Kemp, he wouldn't have needed subterfuge." "So the man in the hat?" "Same guy." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Highly probable. He left the Bishop as both a message and a test. He's watching for reactions. Then we have to react." "We already have," Wolfe said. "Now we must escalate." "How?" "Tomorrow morning, call Estelle Vogelman. Invite her and all 4 poker companions here. Do not say why. Just insist it's urgent." "You think the Bishop will show up?" "No, but the man who placed it might, and what will we do?" Wolfe finally looked at me, his eyes bright with something close to pleasure. "We will listen, and when the silence grows uncomfortable, I shall speak." That was Wolfe's version of announcing war, and I had a feeling the man in the brown hat wasn't going to like what he heard. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe summon a gathering, you're missing one of the finer examples of strategic sadism in action. He does it like a high priest arranging a sacrifice. Slowly, methodically, with just enough vagueness to make everyone twitch before they show up. And show up they did. Right on time in varying degrees of confusion and irritation. At 11 sharp the next morning, I opened the front door to a parade of old money and older grudges. Estelle Vogelman arrived first, face composed, but eyes sharp. Behind her came Garth Belden, tall and wiry, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Leo Ferris, round-faced and sweating, like he regretted every step up our front stoop. Miriam Carswell, widow twice over and still managing to look like she owned half of Manhattan. And finally, Lauren Grieve. I'd been waiting for that one. He came in last, deliberately, wearing a grey 3-piece with a silk pocket square folded just too perfectly for coincidence. Mid-60s, silver hair trimmed with military precision, and a jaw that looked like it had been used for clenching more than chewing. Wolfe, naturally, didn't rise. He sat behind his desk like a lion at rest, with the chess bishop on a small black cloth to his right, half an inch from a glass of beer. The sight of it made Estelle blanch. Grieve, on the other hand, narrowed his eyes at it like it owed him money. I seated everyone with the grace of a maitre d' hosting a group dinner for guests who might poison one another. Wolfe opened with his usual warmth. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I apologize for the abruptness, but time is a delicate currency. Belden shifted in his chair. We weren't told what this was about. Wolfe nodded. No, you weren't. Deliberately. Sometimes the arrangement of people in a room is more illuminating than the words exchanged. Ferris wiped his brow. Are we under suspicion? No, Wolfe said. You are under observation. That landed like a velvet hammer. Miriam crossed her legs and uncrossed them again. Grieve didn't move. Wolfe let silence stretch, one of his favorite tools, then gestured to me. I stood, retrieved the envelope from Wolfe's desk, and opened it slowly. The black bishop glinted faintly in the light. This, I said, was found in the coffin of Herbert Carraway. Placed there after the viewing, before the burial. Carried in by someone posing as legal counsel, possibly someone in this room. Now we had attention. Real attention. Estelle looked from face to face. Ferris fumbled for a handkerchief. Belden leaned forward like he was about to object, but stopped. Only Grieve stayed frozen, his eyes locked on the bishop. I don't see what this has to do with me, Miriam said. I hadn't seen Herbert in 6 months. We were bridge partners, not blood relatives. No, Wolfe said, but you are close with Mr. Ferris, who is executor of Carraway's local holdings. It is, as you say, a small circle, Grieve broke his silence. Is this a police matter? Not yet, Wolfe said, and with some cooperation it needn't be. Belden scoffed. What kind of message would a chess piece send, anyway? A bishop, Wolfe said, moves diagonally. Indirectly, but always with purpose. That shut Belden up. He turned toward the window. I decided it was time to stir the pot. Someone used Daniel Kemp's name to gain access to the casket. Planted this. Knew the route. Knew the timing. Knew the hat would be noticed. Grieve blinked. Hat? Estelle turned sharply. You were at the funeral. Watching from the edge of the cemetery, he didn't deny it, just tilted his head. I was saying goodbye, he said, in my own way. I wasn't invited. Wolfe's voice was as smooth as Scotch. And the hat? Grieve shrugged. It was Herbert's. I retrieved it from his driver 3 years ago. He left it behind after a luncheon. I kept it. Myra hated it. I thought it might say what I couldn't. Which was, Wolfe prompted, that I knew the truth. Estelle leaned forward. What truth? Grieve's gaze didn't move. That Herbert didn't die by accident. That dropped the room into stillness. Even the radiator stopped hissing. Ferris whispered. He had a heart attack. He did, Grieve said, but it wasn't unprovoked. He had been receiving threats, months of them, notes, anonymous, all referencing a debt unpaid. He told me he thought it was from someone he'd crossed during the war. The war? I asked. Herbert worked customs for the government during the late 40s, helped enforce sanctions. He once told me he'd ruined a man, blocked an entire shipment of stolen antiquities headed to Argentina. It cost someone millions. He thought someone had finally come to collect Wolfe. Nodded once, very slightly. And you believed him? I did. Because a week before he died, he tried to get in touch with someone from that old case. A contact in Havana, but he never made the call. Estelle was pale. Why didn't you tell me? Because you hadn't spoken to him in weeks, Grieve said sharply, and because I didn't want to get dragged into whatever storm he'd brought on himself. Wolfe closed his eyes. The bishop, then, was a signature. A calling card. Yes, Grieve said. He believed whoever he'd wronged was part of something bigger. Not just a smuggler. A society. Now we had a clearer picture, and Wolfe liked nothing better than pictures with sharp lines. You placed the bishop, Wolfe said, because you wanted us to see the pattern. Grieve exhaled. I wasn't sure anyone would look. Wolfe opened his eyes again. We did, but now we must identify who else was watching. Because if someone sent that bishop as a threat to Caraway, and he's gone, then the next recipient may already be in this room. Ferris gulped audibly. I advise, Wolfe said, that no one travel alone until we learn more. Grieve leaned back. Then you believe me. I believe the bishop was deliberate. The seal ring was old, stylized, not decorative. I'm having it traced. When I have the name, I'll have the motive. Belden finally found his voice. And if we don't cooperate? Wolfe's tone didn't change. Then I'll assume the next bishop belongs to you. That cleared the room in 5 minutes flat. Estelle lingered at the door. Mr. Wolfe, she said, do you think he was right? That someone wanted him dead? Wolfe didn't look up. I think someone wants to reclaim something they believe was stolen. And they are beginning with symbols. She nodded and left. Wolfe reached for his beer but didn't drink. Just stared at the chess piece. He's not lying, I said. No, Wolfe murmured, but he's also not finished. The room had barely cooled from the last guest's departure when Wolfe reached for the phone. He didn't like phones. He liked beer, orchids, and silence. But when he did reach for one, it meant something was boiling just beneath the surface. I watched from my usual spot near the bookcase as he dialed with precise, indifferent fingers. Saul, he said simply. Then a pause. The ring. The seal on the envelope that held the bishop. I want you to find its origin. It is a stylized bishop's mitre. Carved, not cast. Possibly European, possibly ecclesiastical or fraternal. Track it. He hung up before Saul could say more than hello. Wolfe trusted Saul's intuition as much as he trusted mine, but with Saul, he expected answers, not conversation. I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms. You think we're dealing with some kind of cult? No, Archie, he replied, adjusting his bulk in the chair. Cult implies irrationality. This is methodical. We are facing a legacy, our legacy. Wolfe nodded. A structured vengeance. Cold, patient, codified. Caraway's past offended a code. The bishop is not a threat. It's an indictment. That was Wolfe at his most philosophical. I let it hang in the air and made for the kitchen. Fritz, bless him, had prepared an early lunch. Cold veal tongue with mustard glaze and a pear salad that could have passed for art. I took a tray into Wolfe, who ignored it entirely. His eyes were closed, but his mind was halfway to Warsaw, or Rome, or wherever dead shipping tycoons and stylized seals like to rendezvous. I was halfway through my own plate when the phone rang. Wolfe opened one eye and gestured. I picked it up. Archie, said Saul's voice, low and efficient. Got something. That seal. It's from a defunct religious order, the Brothers of St. Darcius. Obscure. Disbanded in 1952. Last known chapter operated out of Lisbon, but they had a New York presence. Small, very discreet. Discreet how? They handled reclamation. Property seizures. Art repatriation. Rumors say some were used post-World War II by intelligence agencies, and some went freelance. That caught my attention. Freelance revenge? That kind of thing? Freelance collection, Saul said. You wronged the wrong people. They made it right. Quietly. By the book. Their book and that ring. Documented in 3 archived cases, always left as a warning. One of them involved a stolen sculpture from a Vatican-linked shipment. Another, customs fraud. Lisbon, again. Any names? One, he said. Gustavo Melas, archivist turned enforcer. Disappeared in 1954. Presumed dead. Think he's back? I think someone's using his playbook. I hung up and relayed it all to Wolfe. He said nothing for a moment. Then he reached for the bishop again, turning it over in his fingers like he could hear it whisper. Caraway blocked a shipment, he murmured. Cost someone a fortune. The shipment belonged to or was protected by this brotherhood, and the act was deemed unforgivable, but he did it as part of his job. Yes, Wolfe said, but morality and codes are not always aligned. So what do we do? Wolfe's eyes opened slowly. We look for the pattern. There will be others. It didn't take long. Saul called again that afternoon. 2 names, Anton Berksey and Marcus Lang. Both had worked in international shipping. Both had sudden cardiac events in the last 2 years. Both were in their 60s. Both had closed cases involving seized artifacts, and both, like Carraway, had brief funerals, and buried with them, unknown to their families, were black bishops. One in Marseille, one in Toronto. Saul found records, notations from mortuary staff, subtle mentions in obituaries. Lang's daughter remembered an odd envelope that turned up during cremation but was dismissed as ceremonial. Wolfe exhaled like a storm had passed through his ribcage. "We have a list," he said. "A kill list." "A scorecard," he corrected. "Each bishop a mark against someone who transgressed. Perhaps not even the men themselves, but the actions they represented. Then who's keeping score?" "That," Wolfe said, "is what we must know before the next bishop is delivered." I stared at the chess piece still resting on the black cloth. It wasn't just plastic and paint anymore. It was a signal fire. We needed someone who knew the old codes. The next morning I called Daniel Kemp. I told him Wolfe requested his presence for a matter of clarification. He arrived just past 10, eyes wary but spine stiff with lawyerly pride. Wolfe didn't waste time. "Mr. Kemp," he began, "did Herbert Carraway ever consult you about property disputes dating from the late 1940s? Kemp blinked. "You mean before I was born?" "Any reference in the files?" "Notes, probate discussions. A will draft that mentions historical items or foreign holdings," Kemp considered. "There was something. A codicil from the 1980s. Never executed. It mentioned an object, a reliquary. Never detailed. Just a reference to pending retrieval. Who was it for? No name given. Just instructions that, should it ever be recovered, it be returned to its original owner's family." "Did Carraway say who that was?" "No, but he was emphatic. Said it wasn't his to keep, that he'd made a mistake that sealed it. We were looking at the wreckage of one man's moral cleanup, decades late and too subtle to protect him from someone who had waited too long to forgive." As Kemp left, Wolfe folded his hands. "There's more to come," he said. "How can you be sure?" "Because the bishop was not left to scare Miss Vogelman. It was left to signal the next name on the list." I frowned. "You think she's next?" "No," Wolfe said, "but someone close to her is. Someone whose silence has been mistaken for guilt. I didn't like the sound of that. Not one bit. And Wolfe, who hated metaphors, didn't use one. He just stared at the bishop again and said, 'The next move is theirs.' I don't like surprises. Not because I'm skittish. Ask any hood I've helped haul to jail. But because in Wolfe's world, surprises are just loose ends with knives on them." So when Estelle Vogelman showed up unannounced on our stoop 2 evenings after Kemp's visit, dressed in storm gray silk and eyes a little too bright, I knew something had shifted. I showed her into the front room without fanfare and knocked on Wolfe's door. He doesn't allow visitors after 6 unless they're bearing truffles, subpoenas, or very bad news. Estelle didn't have a basket and wasn't waving paper. "She's visibly agitated," I said as Wolfe looked up from a book on medieval Sicilian cuisine. "But she also smells like le heure bleu and guilt." "Bring her in," he sighed. She walked into the office like someone approaching a confession booth. Wolfe didn't rise, just set the book down and steepled his fingers like he was preparing to give absolution. "At a price." "Miss Vogelman," he said, "you've arrived at a pivotal moment. May I assume that's not coincidental?" She hesitated, then sat. "It's Lauren." "Grieve?" "Yes. He came to see me this morning. Said he had to tell me the rest." "The rest of what?" Wolfe asked mildly. "He lied to you," she said, almost in a whisper. "Not about the bishop. Not about the man at the funeral. About what happened between him and Uncle Herbert." I leaned forward. Let's have it. She nodded. It wasn't a business falling out. Not exactly. My uncle cut Lauren out of the will 5 years ago, not because of money, because of a box. Wolfe blinked, his version of a gasp. A box? Yes, a carved wooden box that Uncle Herbert kept in his study. I remember it. It had a brass clasp and strange symbols carved into the top. He never let anyone touch it. Said it came from Lisbon, from a warehouse fire. Lorraine wanted it, pressured him to give it up. Said it belonged to someone else, and he'd been asked to reclaim it quietly. Asked by whom? He wouldn't say, but Uncle Herbert got angry. Said Lauren was trying to turn him into a fence. He cut him out of his life after that. Out of his will, too. Wolfe closed his eyes. So Grieve was the first to sound the alarm and may also have lit the fuse? She nodded. He told me today that he hadn't meant for it to go this far. He thought that placing the bishop would scare someone into speaking up, but he's scared now. He said something's coming, and soon I met Wolfe's eyes. He didn't need to say it. I already knew. We were running out of time. After Estelle left, I called Saul again. We need eyes on Grieve. Round the clock. Already there, Saul replied. You told me the guy smelled like cold secrets. I filled him in on the box, the Lisbon connection, and the implication that Grieve had been acting as an intermediary for someone with a long memory and an even longer reach. Keep watching him, I said, but discreet. If this is escalating, we need to see who moves first. That night, Wolfe barely touched his dinner. Fritz took it personally, but I didn't. I'd seen Wolfe like this before, coiled in silence, hunting without moving. Around 10, he spoke, and it felt like thunder from a cloudless sky. The box, he said. Yes? It's the centerpiece. Not the bishop, not the ring. The box. Grieve didn't just want it. He was assigned to retrieve it. I nodded. You think he's part of the Brotherhood? Not originally, but perhaps an instrument, someone who owed a debt, or someone whose silence was purchased, and now he's trying to return what he couldn't recover the first time. I leaned back. That means the box still exists? Yes, Wolfe said. And we must find it. Before they do the next morning, I went to see Estelle again. She wasn't home. Her building's doorman said she'd left just after 9, looking distracted. I called Saul, but Grieve hadn't moved all night. That meant one of them was lying. Both were walking into something alone. Wolfe sent me back to Carraway's house, what was left of it. Estelle had been managing the estate and the place had been cleared out, but the study was still intact. I let myself in with the key she'd given me the week before and went straight to the wall safe behind the oil painting of an Andalusian horse. It was open. Inside, nothing but dust and the faint scent of cedar. But in the lower drawer of the desk, unlocked oddly, I found something, a waxed linen handkerchief, folded tight. I opened it, and there, pressed into the fabric, was the faint trace of red wax and the impression of a seal, the same one that had marked the envelope, and next to it, in almost illegible handwriting, a note. He said the relic belonged to the order. It was never meant to leave Lisbon. I tried to send it back through Grieve. He refused to go. It was signed simply H.C. I called Wolfe from the front room. He answered on the first ring. I have a note, I said, from Carraway. Confirming the box was the object of contention. He tried to return it through Grieve. Grieve refused. Then Grieve's bishop, Wolfe said slowly, was not a warning. It was a penance. I felt the ice slide down my spine. You think he knew they'd come for him? I think he hoped they wouldn't. And now they will. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had already summoned Grieve. This time, there was no polite veneer. He sat stiff-backed, sweat shining on his brow, eyes darting like a man watching shadows grow. You lied, Wolfe said flatly. You withheld the existence of the box. I didn't. You did. You attempted to return it. Failed. Then they tried to make amends symbolically. But the bishop wasn't received as an apology. It was received as defiance. Grieve sagged. I didn't know how to give it back. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Where is the box? I don't have it. Who does? Grieve looked up. Estelle. That made both Wolfe and me go still. She found it in the attic last month, Grieve said. She told me she didn't understand it. She was going to take it to Kemp to get appraised. Wolfe pressed his fingers together. Then we must intercept her. Now Wolfe doesn't bark orders. He lets gravity do the talking. But when he said, we must intercept her, the air in the room got heavier by the second. Grieve had just dropped the bomb. Estelle had the box, the relic, the object that had caused more quiet deaths and sealed envelopes than most weapons ever did. And she didn't know what she was holding. Do you know where she took it? I asked Grieve, already halfway, to the door. She mentioned seeing Kemp again, said she didn't trust appraisers, that he'd know how to document it legally before transferring it to the estate. I didn't wait for Wolfe's nod. I was out the door in seconds, calling Saul as I ran. She's likely heading to Daniel Kemp's office, I said. If she's not there already, intercept her. Don't scare her, but don't let her hand that box over to anyone but me. Wolfe thinks someone else might already be watching. Saul didn't ask questions. On it. 20 minutes later, I walked into Kemp's building like I owned it. The elevator was too slow, so I took the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached the 4th floor, the hallway was empty. Quiet, too quiet. Kemp's office door was closed, but light seeped through the frosted glass. I knocked twice. No answer. I opened it. Kemp was there, behind his desk, upright, breathing, but barely. His collar was loose, and his face was pale as milk. The box sat in front of him on the desk, closed, no sign of force. Beside it was a small envelope. Another one. I didn't need to open it. I knew what would be inside. A black bishop. I checked the room fast. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Whoever left it had come in through the front, either while Kemp was distracted or as someone he trusted. Mr. Goodwin, he said weakly, trying to regain control of the room and probably his pulse. She brought it in 15 minutes ago. Estelle, he nodded, said she'd found it. Wanted to do the right thing. I told her I needed to authenticate it. Look at provenance, whatever scraps of it existed. While I was opening the file cabinet, someone slipped in, behind her. Quiet, male. She screamed. I turned and saw him place that envelope on the desk, right next to the box. Then he left. She followed him. Said she recognized him. I was already dialing Saul. He picked up after 2 rings. She's gone, I said, with a man, possibly the same guy from the funeral. Wolfe was right. They're escalating. We saw them leave, Saul replied. I tailed from a distance, like you said. They got in a black sedan, rental plates, Midtown agency. I'm already tracking down the plate. Find them, Saul. And be quick, I turned back to Kemp. You all right? He nodded, shaken, but all right. I didn't touch the box. I picked it up with my handkerchief. The thing was surprisingly light, maybe 10 inches long, with old brass hinges and a faint odor of dust and something older, something like incense and rope. I need to take this. Take it, he said, too relieved to argue. Whatever this is, it's above my pay grade. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already setting out his tools. A magnifying glass, a digital scale, a linen cloth, a few drops of cleaning solvent. He didn't speak as I set the box on the table in front of him. Did she follow him willingly? He finally asked. She wasn't dragged. That's what scares me. Either she knows more than she told us, or she's being manipulated by someone very good at pushing buttons. Describe the man. Tall, gray suit, pale skin. Same one described at the funeral, I'm sure. But now he's close enough to walk her out of a law office in broad daylight. Wolfe examined the box in silence. There are no locks, he said finally, which means it wasn't meant to keep something in. It was meant to protect something from exposure, like a relic or a ledger. He opened the lid gently. Inside, wrapped in old linen, were two items. One was a small gold medallion, the surface worn to near obscurity. The other was a folded piece of vellum, ancient but intact. Wolfe didn't touch them. He only stared. "This is the link," he said, "between Caraway and the Brotherhood, between Lisbon and New York. The item Grieve failed to return, the item the bishop was meant to avenge. What do they want with Estelle?" "Perhaps nothing," Wolfe said. "Or perhaps she is now the final witness. Someone who might speak before they're finished. Either way, she is in danger." The phone rang. I snatched it up. "Got him," Saul said. They checked into the Belmore Hotel, Midtown. Room 714. I have eyes on the hallway. "They haven't left. I'm coming," I said. "Don't let them leave." I grabbed my coat, checked the Smith & Wesson, and started for the door. Wolfe didn't stop me, but he did speak. "Observe. Do not interfere unless she is harmed. If you must speak, say this: the bishop has been moved. The ledger is no longer sealed." "Son, that's some kind of passphrase?" "No," Wolfe said, "but it will unsettle him. Perhaps enough to reveal something." The Belmore was one of those hotels that liked to pretend it wasn't seedy by dimming the lights and putting a piano in the lobby. I met Saul by the elevators. He handed me a room key. "The manager owed me a favor," he said. "Grieve's up there too, just arrived. Looks like he was called in." We went up together. The hallway was silent. At 7:14 I knocked once, then used the key. Estelle was standing by the window. The man from the funeral, tall, pale, and expressionless, stood beside her, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder. Grieve stood near the wall, eyes flicking between them. I spoke Wolfe's line. "The bishop has been moved. The ledger is no longer sealed." The man's expression didn't change, but his hand twitched, just slightly. Estelle turned. "You have it." "I do," she exhaled, shaky. "He said I had to bring it, that they'd stop if I gave it back. They won't," I said. The man took a step forward. "You misunderstand." "I don't think I do," I replied. "You've already placed 3 bishops. You don't bury the blade after the 4th. His mouth opened slightly. "We are not butchers." "No," I said. "You're auditors, with a very old book and no sense of inflation." He blinked slowly. Grieve said nothing. Estelle looked like she might cry. I lifted the small parcel from my pocket and held it out. "One condition, you talk. Here. Now, who are you?" He took the box. His hands were steady. He opened it and stared at the relic like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. "We are what remains of St. Dacius," he said. "This was never meant for auction, nor theft. It was a chain, and someone broke it. I didn't like the sound of that. Not one bit." He cradled the box like it was made of glass and grief, the lines in his pale face deepening as he looked down into its linen-wrapped contents. For a full 30 seconds, nobody in that hotel room said a word. Even Saul held his breath, which I'd never seen him do before, not even while tailing mob enforcers in the Bronx during that mess with the pastry shop and the poisoned cannoli. The man from the funeral, still unnamed, still composed, ran a fingertip across the medallion and the folded vellum, then finally looked up. His voice was low, but unnervingly clear. "You don't know what this is," he said. I kept my tone even. "No, but I know what people have done to get it." And what they're still doing. Estelle was leaning back against the window now, pale as ash, her eyes darting from Grieve to the man to me, trying to decide if she was part of the scene or just caught in its undertow. Grieve stood stiff and silent, mouth tight. I could see it now. He hadn't come to protect Estelle. He'd come to protect himself, hoping that if he stood still long enough, maybe the past would skip over him like a stone across a pond. The man didn't acknowledge Grieve. He looked only at me, as if he could already see Wolfe's chair behind my eyes. "You were told that the bishop was a message," he said. But it was not only that. It was a debt marker, a black seal. It means the chain is incomplete. And that chain, I said, was broken by Carraway? By Carraway, by Lang, by Birksey. Each held something taken during the Lisbon clearance. Each refused restitution. Some claimed forgetfulness. Some claimed legality. We claimed silence. You mean death. We mean judgment. Not by us, but by the chain. He placed the lid back on the box with deliberate care. We are not assassins, Mr. Goodwin. We are restorers. When a piece of the chain is misplaced, we retrieve it. That is all. Funny, I said, because your method looks a lot like slow-motion execution. There is no rush in justice. I stepped closer. Let me guess. Grieve here was your messenger boy. He couldn't get Carraway to return the box. So you threatened Carraway with a bishop, and when he didn't bend, he was judged. Grieve finally spoke. I didn't know they'd go that far. The man looked at him now for the first time, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was disappointing, cold and surgical. You were given a duty, he said to Grieve. You failed. You hid the truth. You let the box remain lost while the name of Dacius was tarnished by thieves. Grieve took a half-step back. I tried to fix it. You did nothing. Miss Vogelman did what you wouldn't. I put myself between them, palm up. Let's dial it back. The box is here. The ledger is open. If you've got what you came for, there's no reason to escalate. That is not your decision, the man replied, almost gently. Maybe not, I said, but it's Wolfe's. That made him pause. A flicker of something. Recognition, maybe. Curiosity. He sent you to speak on his behalf? He sent me to listen, I said, but also to offer a thought. He believes that vengeance disguised as ritual still leaves a stain. You want the chain complete? Take the box. Take the relic. But the judgment, that ends here. A beat passed, then two. The man closed the box and tucked it beneath one arm. We do not require further judgment, he said. The bishop was delivered. The seal returned. The chain restored. Good, I said, lowering my hand. Then no more funerals. He turned toward the door, then stopped. Tell Nero Wolfe this. There are more like me. We are quiet. We wait, but we are thorough. I'll be sure to pass it on. And just like that, he was gone. No threat, no flourish. Just silence and absence. A shadow leaving behind a colder one. Grieve looked like he wanted to collapse, but pride, or fear, kept him upright. You should have told us from the start, I said. Wolfe might have spared you the sermon. I was afraid, he muttered. So's everyone. It's what you do after that Countess Estelle sat down in the armchair like her legs had finally given up the act. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought I was just giving it back. You were, I said. You just didn't know to whom. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to the entire report without a single interruption. When I described the man's final words, we are quiet, we wait, we are thorough. Wolfe smiled, a small, grim tilt of the lips. Of course they are, he said. That's how they've endured. The box is gone, I said. It's no evidence. No motive for prosecution. Just a lot of dead men and a void where the past should have been filed away properly. And Estelle. She's rattled. But she'll recover. She wasn't the target. She was just the last courier, Wolfe nodded. And Grieve. Shamed into silence. He won't open his mouth for the rest of his life. That may be his redemption. We sat in silence for a long minute. Then Wolfe reached for his beer, took a slow drink, and finally spoke. This, he said, was not a murder case. It was an inheritance, one passed down, not in blood, but in broken promises. Very poetic, I said. He ignored me. The bishop was not the crime. It was the signature, and what do you call that kind of justice? He looked at me, his eyes calm and sharp. I call it ancient. and not without symmetry. Dinner that night was beef tongue with paprika and a bottle of red I hadn't seen before. Wolfe didn't mention St. Dacius again. He didn't have to. The bishop had been moved. The ledger opened, and somewhere, in a cold hall behind a forgotten chapel, the chain was one link longer. When you've worked with Nero Wolfe long enough, you start to understand that justice, at least the way he sees it, isn't always about courts or collars. It's about balance, equilibrium, making sure the world, or at least his corner of it, doesn't lean too far in the direction of cruelty, stupidity, or chaos. So, after the chain was restored, the bishop retrieved, and the threat dissipated like fog in the sun, you'd think things would go back to normal at the brownstone. But with Wolfe, normal is just what happens between bouts of philosophical indigestion. 3 days after the box was returned to the silent emissary of the Brotherhood of St. Dacius, Wolfe summoned the entire cast, minus the ghosts, to his office. Not for confrontation this time, but for clarity, for ritual, for closure. Estelle Vogelmann arrived looking like she'd aged 5 years and hardened in the fire. Her nerves had recalibrated into something closer to steel. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she was aware. She'd stared down something old and strange and walked away with her conscience intact, and that does things to a person. Daniel Kemp followed, bringing legal briefs no one asked for. Grieve showed up last, as if on cue, shoulders slouched but eyes wide open, like a man finally willing to bear witness to the whole mess he'd helped cause. Wolfe, of course, didn't rise. He sat behind his desk like the monarch of a realm made entirely of mahogany and reason. When everyone was seated, he spoke without preamble. "You have been part," he said, "of an incident that will not be repeated, recorded or resolved by traditional means. There will be no police report, no trial, no inheritance dispute. What occurred was a reckoning, not in the legal sense, but in the historical one." Kemp cleared his throat. The Brotherhood. Who are they, really? A religious cult? A secret order? No, Wolfe said. They're institutional memory. They exist to enforce rules that governments cannot recognize. Their jurisdiction is moral, not civic. Their tools are silence and symbolism, and they have been at this for longer than any of us have been alive. Estelle leaned forward. So they're done? With me? With this family? Yes, Wolfe said. You have returned the item. You fulfilled a debt your uncle incurred. They are not cruel, only precise. And what about Grieve? She asked quietly. Grieve didn't flinch. I was their proxy. I thought I could do what Herbert wouldn't, deliver the box. I thought I could control the outcome. You couldn't, Wolfe said. Because you were never the judge. Only the courier. Kemp frowned. So we just pretend none of this happened. Bishops in coffins, envelopes, threats. It was not a threat, Wolfe said. It was a reminder. And now it has passed. I glanced around the room. Estelle was taking it all in with calm detachment. Kemp looked like he was itching to draft a legal memo about supernatural arbitration. And Grieve, well, he was sitting straighter now. Not absolved, but maybe accepting that his place in this little shadow play had always been that of the man who stands near the fire and pretends he's not getting warm. As the meeting broke, Wolfe offered a final word. Miss Vogelmann, he said, your uncle made a mistake. He tried to bury something that demanded return, but in the end, it was your actions that corrected the balance. Take some pride in that. She nodded once. I do. Later that night, as Fritz prepared roasted duck and asparagus vinaigrette, I sat across from Wolfe with a glass of beer and the last pages of the case file in my lap. The bishop was gone, the box was gone, and yet it felt like something had been added to the world, not removed. I've been thinking, I said, about the guy in the hotel. The quiet one. He never gave his name. He didn't need to, Wolfe replied. Still, I said. Don't you want to know who he was? No, Wolfe said simply. Knowing his name would not change what he did, nor what he represents. You think there are more like him? Undoubtedly. But they do not interest me. They are not unpredictable. It is those who imagine themselves immune to consequence that require attention. I nodded. So we won? No, Archie, Wolfe said, closing his book with deliberate finality. We survived. Others may not have. He took a sip of his beer and added, The ledger is balanced. But not closed. I sat back and let that land. In this line of work, we chase shadows. But this time, the shadows came to us and left with their prize. And Wolfe, who never moves unless he must, had managed to intercept an entire legacy of judgment from the comfort of his chair. If that's not winning, I don't know what is.